Welcome to Collecting Chaos and how to collect comics. This one is about condition and what to look for. Obviously, if you collect comics, you're going to want to get something good. I mean, you're not going to want the worst comics in the world. So condition is very important, and condition determines value. While I try not to preach about value, let's face it, the better conditioned comic, the longer it's going to last. Value is important to the collector because it tells you how much to pay for a specific comic. Obviously, a low-grade comic is going to be a whole lot less than a high-grade comic. And if you're paying the same for a low-grade comic as what someone pays for a high-grade comic, you're paying too much. That's why it's important to know a little bit about the conditions and to be able to determine, is this a good comic to buy or is it a bad comic to buy? I was kind of hoping I would have some people watching while I'm filming this, which is why I went live. But I don't right now. So I'm just going to continue on, and it'll be posted later on. Oh, hi, Cam. Glad to see you. I guess I do have a couple of people watching. There's three basic things you need to know about collecting comics as far as condition goes: high grade, mid grade, and low grade. High grade is obviously the more desirable amongst the collectors that are looking for an investment. Low grade is good enough for the average reader. Mid grade is exactly what it sounds like. That's the middle of the road comics. There are certain things to look for when you're collecting comics as far as the grade goes or the condition goes. And all of it goes under the heading of grading. And I'm not going to go deep into grading. I will answer questions about it in a little while. But basically, I'll pull one of these comics out. These are all comics that I intend on selling at some point. This would be considered a high-grade book. Unfortunately, it's probably flipped around backwards because YouTube. Go figure. Hopefully, they'll change it. It has a few spine ticks along the side, and it's important to know the difference between a spine tick and a spine crease. A spine tick can be on a high-grade comic. A spine crease cannot. Corners are sharp, and in general, it's a good-looking book. On the other hand, don't want to put it in the wrong spot. I know I've got one around here somewhere. This, on the other hand, would be more of a low-grade book, or a mid-grade book, I should say. Notice that these aren't spine ticks. These are spine creases. They break color. A spine tick will look like that, but will not break color. And this would be considered a mid-grade comic. So this is desirable, but not as desirable as the high grade, obviously. Hi, Tina. And finally, I should have a low-grade comic around here somewhere. I know I have some somewhere. This would actually be considered a low-grade book. It's got a chunk missing out of the back cover. It's detached at the lower staple. It has holes along the spine. It has a stain up here, and it has some creases and other things wrong with it. So it's a pretty good looking book, and it presents fairly well, but it's still a low grade book. I can answer that for you. A 10 is Gem Mint. It's a perfect comic. Let me get my my cheat sheet out if I have one. I don't have one with me. Anyway, a 10 is perfect. It has no flaws. I've seen maybe 3. A 9.9 is mint, but it's not. It might have one small flaw. A 9.8 is still considered mint, but it might have 1 or 2 flaws. From there, you go to 9.6. It would have 3 to 4 flaws, and that's near mint to mint, or mint minus, but near mint to mint is the more correct term. 9.4 is near mint. 9.2 near mint minus. 9.0 is very fine to near mint. 8.5 would be very fine plus. 7 or 8 is very fine, and it just goes down from there. I'll post a full description in the comments after the video. Like I said, like I was saying though, it's important to be able to differentiate. And if you can just go and say, okay, this is high grade, this is mid grade, this is low grade, that'll go a long way to be able to build a collection that's appropriate for what you're looking for. If all you care about is reading a comic, mid to low grade is fine. If you're looking at something for an investment, you want to stick in high grade or mid grade for silver and gold comics. Obviously, high grade is always better, but it's a lot more expensive. In general, you figure if a low grade comic's $3, the chances are a mid grade of that same one is going to be about 10 to 12, and a high grade you're looking at $40-50 easy, or more, depending on if it's a raw copy or if it's graded. I'm not going to get into the whole graded thing right now. So what kind of questions do you have for me aside from the number-based system? And I will get with you on that, Cam. I'll send you out a whole sheet on what it is. Okay. Let's get into a few things that are important about the differences. This is an X-Force comic. It's in really nice shape. It has a slight flaw right here, which keeps it from being mint. It has a slight crease here. Or does it? No, that's not a crease. That's the ink on the paper. And it has a slight flaw there. This, at best, might be a 9.8. Okay, a flaw in a comic is, yeah, a non-color breaking flaw can be pressed out sometimes. This one, if you look, I don't know if you can see it or not, but this one has some little crease lines in here. They're not breaking color. They're more like indentations. And that a lot of that stuff will come out with a press. Right here, I really don't think you can see it with this camera, but right there is a spine tick. It does not break color, and it's really difficult to see. If it broke color, like in this, whereas this one breaks color, you see these little ticks here that break color. That's the difference between a spine tick and a spine crease. Spine crease is much more devastating. You can't have a near mint comic with a spine crease. It just doesn't happen. It's not possible. A very fine and above used to be considered high grade. It's not considered high grade anymore. For some reason, the market's gotten to the point where if it's not near mint, it's not high grade. A lot of those terms have no meaning. Rabbit ears, I've never heard of that term as far as condition goes, except for I'm sure there's somebody that uses it. Staple rust is, you don't find staple rust on high grade comics. Mid grade or below, generally low grade comics will have some staple rust. A lot of staple rust can be removed. As comics age, in particular the older ones, they tend to change color, and this has to do with the acidity of the paper. As you can see, this one is white. There's no set coloration for off-white pages anymore. It's based on the overall color of the page. So if you look at the word balloons on the interior, and it's a nice bright white, but over here it's a little dingy, that would be off-white. On the other hand, if the color in the word balloon is a little dingy, and this is a light tan color, that might be considered cream. Color rub is exactly what it sounds like. Somebody has rubbed off some of the color. If you look at the back of this over by the staples, I don't know. Again, I don't know if you can see it. Right here, that is actually that doesn't actually break color. It can be removed. It's not easy. Color rub is, the color is there, but it looks like it's a little faded in places. Dog ears. A dog ear is when when it's folded down. I guess that would be the same as rabbit ears. A sharp corner. This is a sharp corner. Then you have blunted corners. I'm looking for something with blunted corners. I might have to go in my other room. Anyway, yeah. While this corner is somewhat, all of these corners are sharp, but this is a good example of a dog ear right here. But I call them corner creases. Other people call them dog ears. This, you see where it's not quite as sharp, that's corner blunting. On the back, it actually has water stains on the back of this. As you can see, it's got quite a few of them. those watermarks are called several different things. Yeah, but a non-sharp corner, basically, the corner needs to come out and go straight down. If it's slightly pressed in or slightly dented, it's not sharp. A lot of it can be considered common sense. I mean, if you have a long crease, obviously, like this one does, it actually has a fairly long crease in it. That's going to be a whole lot worse than a small crease like this. And as to how many points, I actually have a chart for that. I've tried to get to the point where comics are not subjective for me to grade. I've got charts for just about everything, going from the length of a crease to watermarks, water stains. Staining can affect it. The best way to learn about grading, if you're really interested, is to get the Overstreet grading guide and read it over and over and over and look at the pictures and compare them to comics that you have. In general, one flaw is one defect. One defect, to me, one defect is a point. Now, I have multiples of that based on how big the defect is. For example, a dimple or a spine tick is one defect. If you have 5 dimples or 5 spine ticks, it's still considered one defect. But it becomes a multiple. You have many defects, or many spine ticks would be one defect, but it would be a more serious defect than just one spine tick. I don't know if I'm making any sense to you or not. But a defect and a flaw is the same thing. But yeah, a lot of people think, oh, okay, this has. If I sent this into CGC right now without pressing it, I would be hard put to get a 9.0 out of it. It looks nearly perfect, but it's far from it. It has this little spine problem on the back, which pressed would probably come out. They'll grade that as a spine crease, even though it doesn't break color. It does have sharp corners. There are some indentations along the comic that, like I said, I don't think you can see them, but I can see them. And you can see a lot of those indentations by holding it like this and looking along it. And you got to just catch it. There are a lot of inconsistency, Gray Man, and that's why I have all these charts that I use to take all of that out. And I know the charts so well that I can just glance at a comic for the most part and give you a fairly good approximation of its grade. One of the biggest problems that people have is when they go to grade a comic, they don't look at the inside. If you're getting ready to buy a book and you're not sure about it, the first thing you want to do is open it up, count the pages. How many pages does it have? Does it have 8? Count the leaves. Does it have 8 leaves to the center? If it is, and it was published after about 1964, it's probably a complete comic. Because most comics published after about 1964 or so have 32 pages. 16 pages in the front, 16 pages, or 16, I can't think of the name of it. But anyway, 8 pages to the center, or 8 leaves to the center, 2 pages per leaf. And actually, they aren't 32 pages, they're 34, because the cover counts as a page. They do. I've seen a lot of the graded comics that come back that I look at them and I go, no way, that's too high a grade, or that's too low a grade. Grading comics is very subjective. I hope to teach people how to do it right, how to get them the way it should be. But people expect too much. They look at a comic, they think, okay, this is going to be a 9.4, and it comes back an 8.5. That's because they didn't know what to look for. They missed something. Get a magnifying glass. Get a loupe. Look carefully at the edges of the comic. Look for any of these small flaws. If you see a problem with the edge of a comic, chances are they're going to see it. If the color on the bottom and the top is different from the bottom and the side is different from the color on the top edge, that's going to be a defect, and they're going to note it. So all of that stuff is important. All of it's worth looking at. But the main thing I'm trying to get to is, as a collector, it's important to know the difference between high, mid, and low grade comics. And from there, unless you're planning on selling comics, the rest of it's not that important. Either if you're not collecting to invest and you're mostly interested in raw books that you can read, you don't really need to know anything aside from high, mid, and low grades. Yeah, people that resubmit comics, they should just be shot. They don't care about anything but the 9.8. And the comics that they're getting back probably aren't 9.8s. They're just, people are tired of seeing them, so they just give them what they want. Yes, it is. The little flaws here, the little ticks and the little problems in this corner and on the bottom that you see on almost every comic. The grading companies don't even count those anymore, which to me is silly because it's a defect. Yes, it was done at the printers or when they cut the paper. It doesn't matter. It's still a defect. There you go, Gray Man. Mid-grade and low grade is fine for you as long as it's a complete book. If it's a complete comic, even if a page is loose, even if a page, and I'm not talking about detached, I'm talking about loose. The page is loose, or maybe it's detached at one staple, or the centerfold is detached at one staple, but it's still there. It's still a complete comic. It's still in at least good condition. Of course, many people today, if you have a good condition comic, they don't even want to look at it because that's not what they want. They want perfection, and you're not going to get it. I like that, Gray Man. Gray Man says, old comics are like my girlfriend, a bit more wrinkled, but than they used to be, but I still love them. I've got some comics in my collection that they're bad. They're really bad. But they were so well loved that you got to appreciate them. And you can tell the difference between a comic that's well loved and a comic that is trashed. A lot of people consider them the same thing, but they aren't. A well-loved, this, pull this Charlton out again. This comic is well-loved. It's got a lot of creases. It was read a lot. But you don't see any really bad damage in it. They did take some care of it. It's just they liked it enough to read it more than once. And of course, Charlton comics are hard to find in good grade anyway. And it's got some problems here, and I'm okay with that. It could probably use a cleaning. If I was going to send it in to get graded, yeah, I would. But I don't. Oh yeah, the Mylar makes crap look good. And that's part of the reasons why I use it, because every comic looks better in Mylar. But the protection I get from the Mylar is why I use it. I can leave this comic in there for 30 years. No problem. It'll probably be fine in this Mylar long after I'm dead. But a poly bag, no. You need to change the poly bags every few years, or they start yellowing, they start wrinkling, they start looking bad. Poly bags, contrary to popular belief, do not destroy your comics. I know that that's what people say, but that's not the truth. I have comics that I've had in poly bags for over 30 years. The comics are fine. What destroys the comics is wild variation in fluctuations in the heat and the cold, destroying them in direct sunlight. Even if the sunlight just hits the top of the comic, the top of that comic is going to brown. Mylar won't protect against that. Very few things will. Exactly. The bags get iffy, but the comics stay in good condition. And one of the things that's important is you don't want to seal those comics up. You want to, and even these. I'll probably put a little nick in the corner of one of these. I'm not going to take it out because I still want this to be in the poly bag. It's got the Deadpool. But I'll probably put a little nick up here so the comic can breathe. So any gases that are produced by the comic interacting with the ink can get out. When I fold a Mylar over to seal it, I fold it tight, and then I raise it up slightly so that it will have a small gap in there so that any gases from the comic interacting with ink can get out. Thanks, Diecast. I appreciate that. I'm here to answer questions if I can. Well, yes and no, Cam. If you want them slabbed to protect them, I'm sorry, I think that's a waste of time. And I'll explain why. They are sealed in Mylar. You'd think that would be a good thing, but they can't breathe. And if a comic can't breathe, it is going to deteriorate. It will turn to dust eventually. I know that sounds silly, but that's the bottom line. So people that are sending their comics in to be slabbed so that they stay nice, well, yeah, it will for a while, but sooner or later, you're going to have a bag of dust or a plastic thing of dust. If you're selling a comic, absolutely. If you want not to get the best price, but to make sure people agree on the condition, slabbing is worth it. If I decide to sell any of my older comics that are worth a lot of money, I will have them slabbed first. Not because I want to get the most money I can out of them, but because when I say this is when this is the condition of it, that's the condition. And there's no argument there. And that was the whole purpose behind getting comics graded originally anyway. It had nothing to do with preservation. I have no feelings on that, Lily, because I don't. I mean, that's up to them. If that's their policy, that's fine. Playboys are considered a classic magazine and very collectible. A lot of people don't consider adult comics collectible, even though they are. Even though there's people out there that want to collect them. I recommend finding a company that will. Check with CBCS and see if they'll do it. It's white and has what looks like rust spots. Yeah, send me a picture of it. They do, but those sheets have to be changed periodically. I think I have some here somewhere. They're over here. These Mippet sheets, or interleaving paper, they put a sheet of that in there. But if you really want to do it right, you have to put more than one sheet in. I put those in some of my older comics. And it doesn't allow any gas that builds up to dissipate. And having the gas trapped in there with the book, once these sheets have absorbed all they can absorb, if the comic continues to create that gas, it will discolor the comic. It will eventually destroy it. Hi, Gracie. I haven't had to swap any of them out yet, but probably every 5 years I would want to swap them out. Every 5 to 7 years. About the same time you swap out backing boards, which I think I threw all of those away that I had that were discolored. Backing boards will discolor over time if you don't keep them in a good environment. They used to say that you should get your slabs redone every 5 to 7 years. I think it's longer now. I think they've stretched that out to, they're saying like 10 years now. I'm not sure on that. Like I said, I don't really deal with slabs. I have a few. I've been busy. I've been too busy to read anything this week. I've been sorting these out and going through all of these, trying to decide what I'm going to keep, what I'm going to get rid of. So I haven't really read anything this week. Exactly, diecast. My light twos with the halfback or the fullback boards, that's all the protection you really need. Now, if you want to be able to look at the front and back cover of a comic, you might consider investing in some of the some of the clear backing boards they have. For my silver and golden, well, for my golden age mostly, I use the full back boards. They're about twice as thick as a half back board. This is that's a full back board right there, and as you can see, it's fairly thick. When you compare it to a comic, it's almost half as thick as the comic is, and it's pretty sturdy. I don't have any halfbacks open right now. And that works for you, Gray Man. That's a good way to go if you have a lot of comics and you don't you. That's why my one video is called the Eternal Mylite Project, because I have so many comics and I am trying to get them all in Mylar, and it takes a long time and it takes a lot of money. For instance, I probably have 1,000 comics here. That would cost quite a bit to put them all in Mylite. And like I said, in the Mylar sleeves, the good part about those, okay, for a half backboard and a Mylite sleeve, if you buy it off of eBay, your chances are you're going to pay around 50 cents for each one. Now, 50 cents a board, that sounds really expensive, but think about it this way. You never, ever have to change the sleeve. You might want to change the board every 10 to 15 years because the halfbacks are archival. These are made by the same guy that supplies the Smithsonian. If it's good enough for the Smithsonian, it's good enough for me. I get them from E. Gerber. I go direct. Matter of fact, yes. Matter of fact, I'm going to have to get some. I'm going to have to put in another order for some because I'm down to my last 100. Anytime you're stacking comics, one staple to the left, one staple to the right. It doesn't matter if you go face to face or if you go like this, one showing the bottom, one showing on the top. Like I said, Dycat, if it's good enough for the Smithsonian, it's good enough for me. Do I have any more questions about the difference between mid, high, and low grade comics? A true 100 or true 10 is a perfect comic. It has no defects. It has sharp corners. It has no printer's defects. It has no no fluff on here on the corner here. It has clean edges all the way around. It has no indentations in it. It's absolutely perfect in every way. And I've seen maybe 3 in the 50 some odd years that I've collected, bought, sold, traded comics. A true 10 is extremely rare. You cannot have a signature on a true 10. If you have an autographed comic, it cannot be a 10. Well, plus the page color. The page color has to be white. It can't be cream. It can't be off-white. It has to be white to be a true 10. There's exceptions to that too, because I've got some comics that have no white pages at all. They were printed with the pages black. Most of the CGC 9.8s that I've seen, I would have graded a 9.5 or a 9.4 or a 9.6. I'm pretty harsh when it comes to grading. I imagine the Library of Congress does use some of the E. Gerber products. They're not. It's just like the adult books and underground comics from the 70s. They're collectible. People like them. A lot of people do collect them, but the industry as a whole considers them taboo and don't consider them collectible. You're not going to find them in here. You should, but you're not going to. I think they finally added the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers in here. But for years, it wasn't listed in here. I do hope well, it's up to the companies. If the companies don't want to deal with adult comics, then they're not going to. And that's the way it should be. It should be up to the company as to whether they want to grade those or not. No, like I said, Bad Bear, I have seen maybe 3 comics, raw comics, that I would consider 10s. They were just absolutely perfect. But I've seen an awful lot of comics in my time too. Well, there's a lot of mainstream small press comics that never show up in Overstreet too. They pick and choose what they want to put in there. They always have. But for the big 2 and some of the companies that are starting to get more and more attention. Atlas Comics wasn't in there for a while. Uh, of course, Atlas Comics is in there now because it's become a big collectible. Oh, I have plenty, but I'm not giving them away this next Wednesday night. That was a one-time thing. I pick different things, and those are things that I give away with the comics that I sell on Wednesday nights. I found a stack of posters. I might give some of those away. Okay, well, this has gone for about 45 minutes now. I'm hoping just to do this for an hour today. I've got other things I need to get done. That's just the standard that they picked. 9.2 is near mint, or near mint minus. 9.2 is a near mint minus. And it is the lowest. Most people consider that the lowest high grade now, even though Very Fine has always been a high grade comic. Very Fine and mint, Very Fine, near mint, and mint are high grades. Mid grades are generally Very Fine minus down to very good, and or very good plus, and then very good and below are considered low grade. They've been There was a time when they didn't have 9.2. They didn't put a numeric grade in the Overstreet Guide. That's only been in the last 5 to 10 years that they've been doing that. I will probably be watching it. I usually do. I don't consider single pages of comics collectible. I wouldn't buy a page out of Action Comics #1. I wouldn't buy a page out of Action or out of Superman #1. To me, an uncollectible comic is a comic that's missing the majority of the story. Coverless comics are collectible. Covers are collectible. But what I consider uncollectible and what other people consider uncollectible may not be the same. None of that makes any sense to me, Padbur. Mike's, that's Comic Book Steals and Deals. He does an auction on Friday night and Saturday night, and then he does a community auction on Wednesday night. I don't think Canadian price variance should be more than the U.S. prices. I think they should be the same, and I think the U.K. price, if it's the same comic, it should be worth the same amount. If anything, the UK price variance should be more because there's fewer of those than there are of the US ones. And probably the same thing with Canadian. There's fewer of them, therefore they consider them more rare, even though they probably aren't. Exactly. There's less of them, so to me should make them more valuable, not less. It's just like there's a big deal about newsstand comics being more valuable than direct market. Well, for years, direct market were there were few of them published. In the early or mid 70s and early 80s, the number of direct market comics compared to the newsstand comics was it's like 10 to 20% of the direct market comics were the total print run, and the rest of them were newsstand. But the newsstand comics are more valuable most of the time. Part of the reason for that on those early ones is the newsstand comics are harder to find in high grade. Exactly. It's exactly the same comic, but the price point is different, and or the price in the box is different. And most of the Canadian variants, you'll find, okay, they have a Canadian price, but they also 9 times out of 10 will have a U.S. price on them too. And that started happening more in the late 80s, early 90s, when most of the printing presses moved to Canada. Most of the printing was done in Canada after a certain period of time. Very few comics are actually printed in the United States now. Mark Jeweller's variants were distributed right around military bases or in the military bases. Um, I know any comic that I bought when I was overseas always had that Mark Jeweller variant or Mark Jeweller's advertisement in it. And so they're not as common. And for some reason, people decided that those are more valuable, probably because they're a little more rare. Uh, I've got some. I don't consider them that big a deal, but they are more rare and they're kind of neat to have. There's that one I've got. Should still have it here. Uh, Boxes on boxes. I must have taken it to the other room. Yep, I took it to the other room. I had the no, the Marvel stamps inside the comics. If a Marvel comic that's published with a stamp, if the stamp is cut out of it, it is considered incomplete. Now that's another term that's kind of strange. An incomplete comic, if it's missing the Marvel stamp, it's generally considered incomplete. But if the Marvel stamp does not affect, taken out of it, does not affect the storyline, and the stories are complete, the comic book should still be considered incomplete, missing something. I've got a couple of comics that are actually missing coupons, but the comic is complete because that missing coupon doesn't affect the story. And yes, there were kids that would clip the coupon or clip the stamps out and there was a little album you could get that was made for them. You could send off and get it. If you're collecting for stories and artwork, as long as the story's complete, what's the problem? It's still a good condition comic. There's nothing wrong with having a collection of good condition comics. Any more questions? Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, I think I'm going to go ahead and end this stream. It's been great. I really appreciate you all coming out and supporting me. Uh, if you enjoyed it, hit the like button. It doesn't hurt you. If you didn't like it, hit the thumbs down. That doesn't bother me. If you think of other questions, feel free to put them in the comments. I always try to answer comments. I like comments. I like reading them, and I always try to answer them, or at least give some comment back so you know that I did read it. Oh, you mean like you might see a big 8 on there? Generally, that's the date that the comic needs to be taken off sale. Sometimes it's a number that'll be taken off sale. Sometimes it'll be the date that the comic was received. I've seen a big 8 on a few, which works out to, okay, that's the date that would be the month that they would take the comic off sale. And generally, they wouldn't do it to all of them, just the last one. Okay, Diecast, and I'm going to send you a bill in a little while. But not for looking at the picture, but for the comics that you bought. Everything is subjective. Everything about collecting is subjective, and not just comics. Anything you collect, there's a subjectivity to it. It's like, let's take Action Comics #1, one of the most famous comics in the world. It has a cover date of June of 1938. June of 1938 was when it was supposed to be taken off sale. It was actually published in April of 1938. You can't. What makes this socially important? This has no social importance. Oh, wait. That's Liefeld. Maybe it is smut. I'm not the biggest Liefeld fan. He's a whole lot better artist than I am, though. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. Like, comment if you want, subscribe if you're not subscribed, and I'll see you on tomorrow morning's video because it's already made. I just got to upload it. Don't forget, before you handle your comics, before you handle your collectibles, wash your hands. It's good for your comics, good for your collectibles, and it's good for your health. We'll see you next time. Bye.